Welcome to Oneself. My name is Stephen Maher, and with me today is Adam Bartleman. And with me always is Adam Bartleman. Adam, thanks for joining me today. You know, what I want to talk about today is victim mentality. It's easy to be rooted in mindset that you're a victim, right? You know, awful stuff is happening to so many people around the world at all times, and it's easy to get bogged down in why me, right? Why is this awful stuff happening to me? And I'm not trying to compare suffering, right? Like, it's hard to compare suffering from one person to the next, right? Like, who has it worse? Like, it's really, really tough to do that. And that's not what I'm trying to say. But I guess my main question is, what is that rooted in? Where is that coming from in people? And is that entitlement? Is that just self pity? And again, with all this stuff, I'm coming from a place of, let me tell a story, right? Before we dive into this, right? Because here's a story, right? And I mentioned this in our last episode, right? But I was born, right? Like I said, half blind in this eye, can't see out of this eye. So when I was 12 years old, I had this woe is me mentality, kind of the preteen thing where it's just like, why did this happen to me? I felt like everyone can see out of two eyes. Like, why was I born with this thing where I can't see out of both eyes? And I felt like really bitter at the world, at the universe for this condition I had. And then I was very lucky to grow up outside of Boston. Boston is like a medical capital of the world, some of the best doctors in all respects in the world, right? And so, very lucky to have some of the best doctors in the world 45 minutes away from me. So, every year I had to go into Boston and see these doctors, and they were some of the best in the world. Like, my doctor was named Dr. Hiroshi, right? And he was this beautiful Japanese man who was doctor my entire life, from when I was born to when I was out of high school, when I stopped really going consistently. I was out of, childhood, right? And this man was with me my whole life. And I remember sitting in that doctor's office one year when I was 12, and I was bitter. And, I was like, oh, like I have to go do this thing every year. And like, I wish I didn't have to do this. But then I remember getting into that doctor's office and I see all these other children around me, and I'm hearing languages from all over the world. Like, these people have clearly flown in here from, all aspects of the world, right? I'm hearing so many different languages, and they have translators with them. And the main thing that stuck with me that year more than any other year was this like self-awareness, was that every other kid in that room besides me was fully blind, and I in that moment I gained, my 12-year-old self kind of gained some perspective, right? I was a victim before of this, this thing, and but for the first time I'm like, yeah, but these kids have it way worse than me. Like, I can see, right? Like, I have the ability with one eye, and I should be
Yeah.
so grateful for just seeing with this one eye, when these kids, man, and like, it tugs at my heartstrings just like thinking about it, because like, it's, what is sadder than a room full of blind children, and these kids are scared and they're lost and they're just trying to navigate the world when, one of their main senses is shut off, right? And they're going to this doctor to try to get help. And that was my big lesson. Don't be like, you could be a victim of your own mind, a prisoner of your own mind, but that flipped a switch in me for gratitude, right? To be lucky with the life I have, and grateful that for my circumstances, and life is hard, right? All that to say, that was just a big experience for me, man. I just want to share that with you to just kind of set the floor of yeah, a big moment in my life that was important for this mentality shift, right? At a young age.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for sharing, and thanks again for having me too. That's a
Always.
that's a powerful story, and it's cool, right? You shift from focusing on I can't see out of one eye to I can see out of one eye,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It's which is just it's yeah, it's very interesting. It's a choice, and I think that this whole conversation needs to be approached with so much gentleness, so much care and love, because it is such a sensitive topic for so many people, and especially many people may say who are two guys that look like us, to be here talking about suffering. But the reality is we've all got our own path that we've walked, and everyone's experience is valid on this planet. Yeah, it's an interesting one. This is a very
It's tough.
layered, yeah, it's a very layered conversation, very nuanced. There's a lot to talk about here, and Yeah, it's an interesting one. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing your personal story. That's powerful.
Yeah, man. So my first shift, like, you said there's parts to this, right?
Mhm.
Was like I said, was gratitude to shift from like
Yes.
I can't see to oh no, I can see. And
Yeah.
there's layers to this. And there's people worse off than me. And to be grateful with what I got. What I mean? And the body I have and what I am capable of and not necessarily focus on what I'm not, right?
Yeah. You shifted the focus of your awareness over a few inches from the eye that didn't work to the eye that did work. It's
Right.
pretty. It's when we look at it that way, it's pretty.
Yeah, man. And so I guess what is this? What was I rooted in? You know what I mean? Like what was
Yeah.
I before that, right? Like why was I bitter? Why was I resentful when I see everyone around me, right? Like majority of the human population can see out of both eyes, right?
Yeah.
And so just using my story as an example for others, like what do you what was that? Why was I this shitty little ungrateful kid?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, no need to
No,
put that
yeah,
on
yeah, yeah,
yourself,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah. No, totally, totally. But
Yeah.
I felt shame right after that
Yeah.
moment for sure. I was like, I was shamed, and I should have been. I think, ashamed of myself because that's how I learned.
Yeah, that can be the wake up call, but ultimately it's I think my personal opinion is it's more beneficial to send love to that part of you that felt hard done by, that felt like a victim, because that part of you, that stage in your life, that was all you knew. That was, you were doing your best at that moment. Right. And this comes down to answer your larger question there a little bit more. It comes down to the over identification with separation consciousness. So seeing ourselves as separate, not seeing ourselves as interconnected. That's kind of a found like it's a deep and esoteric answer, but I think or it's the beginning of a deep and esoteric answer anyway. But it boils down to or it gets at the foundation of it is like we see ourselves as separate, and it's that separate sense of self that can then attach to the idea that it is suffering, that it is experiencing something that it shouldn't, that things should have gone differently. That woe is me is very very separate, self-centered, really.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I couldn't look outside of myself,
Yeah.
right? And see that other people also have it hard, right?
Mhm.
And so focused on myself. And you so are many kids, right? You're in your own world when you're growing up sometimes and play and boredom and discovering the world and trying to figure out this thing called life. You're so wrapped up in your own head, especially as a teenager when you're going to school and like the world seems like school seems so big. Like, right, just going to a school, like that seems like it's the whole world. And then you get older and you graduate and you recognize that the world is so much bigger than just like the school you went to in a town where you grew up.
Yeah. Well, it kind of right as we expand from coming onto this earth in a state of forgetfulness and then being raised by, hopefully a couple of parents. Let's say best case scenario being raised by some parents. Best case scenario in the West. Anyway, like that nuclear family. Not saying that that is the best situation. I think that the more traditional cultural approaches of having a community raise a child, or at least having extended family present, is the ideal situation. But let's say for the sake of our conversation, having two parents there to raise a child, and the kid comes onto the earth, and you kind of look at ultimately looking at the parents as gods, right? They're what are keeping you alive. They're very focused on you and your needs. And as the ego begins to develop, we essentially go through a state as little kids, 2, 3 years old, that toddler phase of being really massive narcissists, right? Because that's all we know. We're coming into more awareness of the self, of a separate sense of self, and this is part of the human experience is going through that forgetfulness and being embodied in what is understood as a separate physical body and moving through the world. And this is this is the function of the ego in order to help that part of the organism survive. But what is supported in our culture, in our society, is an overemphasis on that, a hyper focus on that separate sense of self. And so, yeah, as the child is growing up and going through those stages, we can kind of get locked in that. And as you said, as we grow up, as we grow older, ultimately, an ideal situation for many is expanding outside of the self. Okay, there's more than just me. There's, maybe another sibling comes along. Now I have to understand the concept of sharing. Now, then being able to interact with other kids at school, realizing that Not only your immediate needs are the most important thing in the world, there are needs of other people. And then, maybe we leave high school and we begin to travel a little bit. We learn that there are societies, different societies on this planet that operate in different ways, continuously expanding the mind, right? Expanding the awareness and not focusing so much on that sense of self that was originally developed. But well, maybe I'll leave it there. And
Yeah. So how does one, I mean, I'm sure everybody's met somebody, right? Where my grandfather, for example, he was a teacher in a lot of ways. Like he left, like he took again back to the eye, right? Like for my ability to be able to drive a car. He gave some of the best driving lessons in my life. Something that he said that stuck with me was don't assume anyone is going to follow the rules on the road because they will not. And that stuck with me, right? Like that saved me from countless accidents.
yeah,
So in many ways wise man, right? But something that kind of bummed me out when he was getting older and he died when I was 18. He's like, don't get old. He was a Vietnam War veteran. He was loading napalm missiles onto jet fighters in Vietnam, and napalm's a nasty chemical, man, and it left a mark. So took a number on him. In addition to being a lifelong smoker and kind of a unhealthy eater, like all those things just were this perfect storm of an unhealthy lifestyle that led to a lot of pain in his body. So he kind of I see people get older in two ways, right? Like they kind of become gracious as they get older, and there's people who kind of get resentful. And I
yeah,
think he
bitter,
definitely followed along the resentful track as he
yeah.
was getting older. And yeah, man, how does one go more towards the gracious side, right? Not
Yeah.
more towards the resentful, bitter state of the world was just out to get me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that as we approach that, come to the well, as we age, we come to the awareness, we can come to the awareness, like in the previous question, that the world, the existence that we're going through, that we're experiencing is much bigger than ourselves. But sometimes when there are repeated that can create a blockage in our energy flow, it creates blind spots that can then create an experience of hyper focusing on the self, that sort of victim mentality, right? And as we age, we can begin to look back at what has happened, and if what we at some point agreed upon within ourselves, the beliefs that we created based on our experiences, were that this didn't go properly, this didn't go as it was supposed to, that bitterness can be held on to. But if someone cultivates an awareness in which they see those experiences as not defining themselves, but rather just a journey through which they have been given the opportunity to define themselves through their own beliefs and awareness. And it's not the experiences themselves. So not having the attachment, essentially. And this comes down to Buddhist, Hindu philosophy of not being attached. So, not being attached to the negative experiences, creating space for us to then expand into that more gracious, gently aging experience rather than ruminating on the past, being attached to how things should have gone, or even sometimes in cases, people being attached to good things, right? Like hyper focusing on the glory years and letting that take them
Yeah.
out of the present moment, which is an equal amount of suffering at the end of the day.
Absolutely. No, yeah, I mean, I'm sure we've all known someone who's focused on, yeah, maybe those school days. I didn't mind school necessarily, but I was certainly ready to get out by
Yeah,
my
me too.
by the time I was, 17, 18. I was like, get me out of here.
Yeah,
And I was ready for the next thing. But
yeah,
I have noticed that, man, where you see someone who maybe has gone through some difficult circumstances and it's like they hold on to it for years, right?
yeah,
And for better or worse, like they did survive it, but it has a hold on them. Like that,
yes,
so in our last episode, we both talked about experiences of fathers with issues with drinking, right? And my older brother definitely got that a little bit harder dealing with my father. And he held on to that for a long time, like that anger, that bitterness of like just having to deal with a father who was, yeah, yeah, drinking, right? And all the things that comes with. And he held on to it for a long time. And then I think, yeah, that left an impact and not for the best. And what is that? Like, what's happening
yeah.
there?
So the conversation again, it comes down to attachment, right? And again, either in the negative end of the polarity or the positive, right? Like something happened that I that I didn't like. So now I've armored, I haven't let that energy pass through my being. I've sort of blocked it up because I didn't like it and I don't want it to happen again. So I'm trying to push it away, and I'm trying to sort of bubble wrap the world. I'm trying to bubble wrap my experience to prevent it from happening again. Or something was deemed as being so positive and enjoyable that I'm holding on to it. I'm trying to make it happen again. Both of these things taking us out of the present moment. Both of these things taking us out of our most aligned flow with life, because ultimately life is always happening in the present moment. But when we have attached onto things based on our beliefs, which are generally programmed into us and as young children, we kind of have an idea of like, this kind of thing feels bad, this kind of thing feels good, I want more of this and I want less of that, I want to move away from the bad and I want to move toward the good, which is the operation of the ego essentially. And this is when we have had a system that has pushed us to focus all of our energy and awareness through the lens of the ego rather than deeper states of awareness, that we end up in this mess. So so basically, back to the question though, it's energy comes in from the external world and we attach onto it and we don't let it go. And that energy will stay stuck in your nervous system, to put it on with a physical explanation, will stay stuck in your nervous system until it's released. And that energy, the blocked energy, which in the yogic tradition, as discussed by Paramahansa Yogananda, explained very beautifully, that it's called a samskara. It's a stuck energy pattern that exists within us, and energy never stops moving if we're choosing to hold on to it. Because this is the thing, it's a choice. We choose to hold on to these things. And we may not believe that. We may think, no, I don't like this, I'm not holding on to it. But deep down, there's a subconscious belief that is actually believing that it has to hold on to that. So that energy stays stuck within us, and it has to move because it's energy. So it's just spinning around in there. And I think of it always like when you're watching the weather report on the news and you see like a hurricane on the radar scan, just spinning around.
Yeah, it's a
And I
loop.
yeah, so I think of that stuck energy pattern as being like just a tumultuous kind of spinning energy in there that stirs up when it's attached to the thoughts. It stirs up thoughts and memories that can kind of create even more of a loop going back and forth. The feeling in the body, hitting thoughts in the mind, creating emotions, which can be triggered by anything in the outside world, anything that reminds us of those experiences. And really what we see as I go back to the example of having someone try and bubble wrap their experience, I'm going to try and avoid that type of experience over there because I experienced it once and I didn't like it, so I don't want to experience it again. Really, because you haven't processed that energy and life is working in concert with you, not against you, you're going to end up magnetizing, attracting those experiences into your life again and again in order to give yourself the opportunity to release them. But most people will see that as a woe is me type situation. Why do I keep having an abusive boss at work, even though I've switched jobs a few times? Why do I keep attracting these codependent relationships? And the answer is always, it's something within us, because our internal world is always just being projected outward and being mirrored in our external. So this is the conversation coming back to victimhood and realizing that we are the architects of our own reality, and whatever's going on is there's no one responsible for it but us.
Yeah. So how would someone go about letting go of that stuff, kind of starting a new chapter, trying to be
Yeah,
present, trying to be more present, trying to let go of the things that they were resentful of in their past? Or yeah, like you said, maybe it was a positive thing, maybe it was like, trying to just be okay with the present moment and move
yeah,
on and create new experiences and being okay and content with, where life is at currently.
yeah. Well, it takes seeing moving from a fear-based separation consciousness into a oneness perspective, into a love-based consciousness. Because again, even attaching to something positive in the past, the fact that the person, the being, is attaching onto that experience is a fear-based response as well, even if it was a positive thing. But we're attaching onto this positive experience and not letting it go because we're fearful that it's not going to happen again. We're fearful that we're not going to be given that abundance, those joyful experiences in the future. But really, the attaching onto them is actually pushing them further away, because we're telling ourselves through that action, through that internal subconscious belief, we're telling ourselves that we're not enough. So in order for someone, if someone is looking to go down that path of releasing those things, that's what most people would refer to as shadow work, or examining the unconscious, the subconscious, which, there's an extensive amount of work on all the spiritual traditions, as well as the more aware sort of beings in the psychoanalytic community of the last 140 years. A name that most people are familiar with, Carl Jung. We're examining the subconscious. So this is where we're seeing where the contradictory beliefs reside. And if someone is getting curious about walking down that path, that's the biggest hurdle, because that means that there's some awareness that has kind of bubbled up to the surface, because ultimately we've all got everything within us, but it needs to come to the place of being aware enough to realize that there's a problem, and then to have a motivation to do anything about it. So this is where, in our paradigm up until more or less now, most people have not been pushed to that point until they have experienced their own version of suffering, until they've experienced enough suffering for them to arrive at whatever their definition of rock bottom is, where they're making that choice, like, hey, things have got to be better. I'm going to start moving my energy in the direction of this whole self-improvement thing. I'm going to, examine this whole spirituality thing. I'm going to walk this path of self-improvement. And that's when, and so, like I said, I think the biggest hurdle to overcome is getting to that point, and not even looking at it as a hurdle, but the maturity of the person's soul has gotten to the place where they're now looking to make those changes. And that is the biggest success. So if someone's feeling hopeless, the fact that they're already like looking in that direction is such a massive victory, and such a good cause to pat oneself on the back, because that's the sign that now we can start moving in the direction of growth and looking at that shadow.
Yeah, you already took the first step.
Yep. And we come to realize that ultimately what we try to control, and we try and do all the right things to walk down the spiritual path, ultimately it's all guided. And the more we release control, which again is the ego, the more we wrest control from the ego back, the intuitive self, the easier things get. And that is, for the most part, for most people, including myself, that's the most tricky and fun kind of aspect to walking this path, is finding the places where the ego gets a little more subtle, a little more tricky, and tries to hold on. But it's ultimately always comes back to surrendering and trusting, and sort of falling back into the arms of God.
It's not like these are like, 21st century findings from like psychologists around the world. People have reached conclusions about this kind of stuff. And you speak on it, right? Where Buddhism or Hinduism, or, like there's like a lot of humans have spent a lot of time thinking about this. Generations of work has been put into this kind of thing. And so for me, that's the most, yeah, I love history, right? Like I'm a student of history. So
Yeah, me too.
because yeah, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. You know what I mean? Like you see
Yes.
the fallacies of human nature repeat itself time and time again through human history. And so I think like the most fascinating part about all this for me, is that like people have been working on these questions and these problems of the human psyche for generations, right? And yeah, can you maybe just speak on that a little bit? Like what are the broad patterns that like you've seen, different cultures or different knowledge bases, like what conclusions have they come to, of just of kind of all this stuff? I know you've spoken on it like literally in the past, but anything
Yeah.
else you want to add on to that in the cultural context of history? It's not like, like you said, like Carl Jung is an example of like a more modern example, but it's like this goes back, is just kind of the context of what I'm trying to say. Like there's a history to this knowledge, right?
Yeah, this goes back. This is beyond humanity as well. This is greater than the human experience. But we're here having the the human experience. So we'll just call it that. for
Yeah.
now. Yeah, for me, I mean, I can just share a little bit of my journey, which was getting very curious about this stuff, I don't know, 8 years ago. And then linking it with some of the experiences that I'd had in my earlier in my life and, kind of bringing it all together. But ultimately, beginning to read a lot, and also always been a huge history nerd. So I loved, diving into all that stuff. And what I found most interesting was that the more I learned about each spiritual tradition, like the esoteric root of the different religions around the world from different times, different places, is they were all saying the exact same thing, always. And then when we came into looking at the modern psychology, the more that psychologists followed this, and those that were so practiced that they came into a level of mastery with their profession, they all start finding the exact same thing. Quantum physics in the last 50 years has been finding the exact same thing. And it's that everything is one. It's all consciousness. It's all light, which is consciousness, essentially. That everything in existence, everything in our experience is just a manifestation of like the consciousness, like a thought of God. And that's what I found most interesting. And then through my own experience of walking this path and bringing in the different teachings and practices that allowed me to to do the things to allow myself to be, to bring in the practices that would give the permission slips to release the limiting beliefs, is then this stuff becomes self-evident. It becomes clear, and it it delves into the realm solely of experience and not so much in within the intellect. So again, it's which comes to a funny conclusion, or not conclusion, but to a funny conversation when trying to discuss this with people, because ultimately when someone's coming with an analytical mind and asking for questions, or asking questions and looking for evidence, well, like, how do you know what is this? And you have to respond with, well, I can't really tell you. And even if I could, you wouldn't really want to hear it from me. You have to experience it, and your highest self would want to experience it rather than just be told, because it's not something that can be analyzed and interpreted through the intellectual mind. And then, of course, on the other side, the intellectual, skeptical mind is going to be sitting there going, well, yeah, of course, that's what one would say who doesn't have an answer to that question. But ultimately, there is no real answer to that question. It's just the experience.
Yeah. You mentioned the word God, right? And when people say that word, I don't want it to be misconstrued, or like that's a name, like that's a
Yeah.
title that can encompass a lot of different things. And so it's like that's what we call it, but for the people that are curious but maybe they don't subscribe to religion, which I get, y'all, I was like, I was
Yeah,
raised
me too.
Catholic in Boston.
Me
Like, you know
either.
what I mean? Like I get not wanting to be in that sphere, right? Totally. I don't know. Can you just dive into that a little bit? You know what I mean? I feel like some people will be turned off by that word, and I don't
For
want
sure.
them to be.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. And the baggage that it carries with it. Creator is a better is a
Creator,
good word.
source, universe, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, none of these things are really matter.
I
We're
get it. Yeah.
trying to name the nameless, that which is beyond form, which exists. And I even get just chills even just trying to think about it. And this is not even a realm we can access through the intellectual mind. This is why meditation is so important. This is why being in nature, completely unplugged, is so important. Yeah, we're not talking about a Christian, sorry, like a as Yogananda called it, and it wasn't, because Christianity, as most people understand it, is not really Christianity. Yogananda referred to it as churchianity, which is the business. The
Yeah.
yeah, which
Yeah,
is
man. Like
and
there's a hypocrisy there, right? You know what I mean?
massive,
And
yeah.
yeah,
Massive. And as with which happens throughout all of the religions, giant
right,
gold Buddha statues is missing the point, as well as the
right,
giant, there's the giant Jesus statues. But yeah, we're not talking about a patriarchal, patriarchal God here, which is, patriarchal masculine. It's a word that
right.
is used to refer to something that is far beyond form, and especially beyond the duality of masculine and feminine, male and female energies. That's not what we're talking about here. But yeah,
Right.
create. I always like I use a lot of words interchangeably. Sometimes I use the word God because it does cut into people's awareness. They
Right.
don't
No,
don't.
I want it to,
Yeah,
right? It's like you said, it's a loaded word. There's a lot of
yeah.
there's a lot of stuff that comes to it. And I just want to separate the fact that there's that word under the organized framework that is like rooted in, yeah, Catholic, or me, right, growing up Catholic in Boston. Catholic organization is one of the richest organizations in the world, right?
Yeah.
And but like, do they use that money to like truly help people? I
No.
don't think so. Like, they could be doing so much more in the name of God, right? Like in the name of the things
Yeah.
that they preach, but they don't.
Yeah. It's like, why are
So I
we
just want
even
to make that distinction.
Yeah. It's like, why are we even existing in a system that has money? That this is not this thing that we take to
Right.
be so obvious and such a necessary aspect of our experience is not necessary. It's a sign of a very, very unenlightened and primitive society. And so anyway, yeah. But I appreciate that. And sometimes I say that word because it gets people's attention. Because I know, years ago, if somebody said the word God around me, like, it creeps me out. Like, it would get my attention because I would
Yeah.
probably get my walls up a little bit, which is great. Get that if that's the case now and
Yeah,
using
build
that
them up to
word,
knock
then
them down.
exactly, build them up to knock them down and at least get the conversation going, right? So we even that, because even that word can evoke feelings of victimhood in people, where they're associating it with something bad that they or the world has experienced through churchianity, through organized religion, and are choosing to take that personally in that moment and close their ears to someone that might be sharing a message that might be able to help them.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. My dude, my 16-year-old self would, yeah, as soon as you said that, probably turn that off. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah, 100%. I get it.
Yeah, man. Yeah, but no, I think it's an important distinction to make. Yeah, just because, yeah, again, like you said, naming the nameless, like there's things that are so beyond the human capability of understanding, I'm sure, right?
Yeah,
Where ants trying to, understand how an F-150 works or something. Like, it's just
yeah.
like,
and 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 ultimately, again, it's not, we can kind of like play this ping pong match with ourselves and say, well, it's not even something that can be explained. It's a feeling. Okay, well, let's try and explain that feeling. Like, well, it's love. It's not what, and again, it's not what we mostly think of as love, as we've been conditioned to think in our society. It's attachment, romantic love. This is
yeah,
something much deeper. This is an unconditional acceptance of everything that is, including ourselves, which is often the hardest part
right.
to to relax into. But yeah, it's ultimately a feeling. It's an experience.
And I just want to loop that back to something you said earlier, which is like, what are all these things, the conclusions that all these different philosophies, cultures that you see around the world, like the conclusion
Oh,
that they're ultimately reaching, like, like what is that, right?
yeah, yeah. You might have to do that for me sometimes because I go off on these tangents and I
No,
forget
I
where I
love
was.
them,
But
dude. I love them.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. Ultimately, it comes down to, like, put it really simply, like the golden rule. Like treat others as you want to be treated, because it's not because everything is one. The illusion of, like, the concept of separate people, of separate selves, of us being separate from nature, that is all simply an illusion. The fact is that all is God. And and we in the West here, with this several generations of distorted, organized religion, Christianity programming, has us really had deep in the cellular memory, had us really believing that we're separate from not only separate from God, and that we have to cultivate a relationship, we have to do things in order to come into a relationship with God. We have to come into a relationship with our creator. And not only that, but that we're separate from each other and from nature. This whole, man has dominion over the beasts of the land and sea, whatever, however it went. That's all a profound distortion, because if God is our creator, if source is all that is, then that means it's all that is. There's nothing outside of the realm of our creator, including that which we have been conditioned to think is the worst, are the worst aspects of our experience here, where ultimately it's all just delusion. So, but yeah, maybe I'll just leave it there for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, part of me, I know we talked about this, where it's like coming from this from an approachable place. Sometimes the big questions are what get people going on the path too, right? Of just like self-improvement, right? Just like trying to make themselves better, and the people around them or the world. Like, 'cause
Yeah.
there's a lot of thing that needs fixing, right? And what better place to start than ourselves?
Yes. And I think that, starting with some big questions and some big conversations is is a good thing because ultimately, as far as I can see, and this is my opinion, so that's it. It's just an opinion, but I believe this 100% with 100% knowing is that if you continue looking long enough, if you continue on this path long enough, and you don't kind of hit a plateau of going, okay, I've got my mindfulness practices down. I've quit drinking, I'm doing my like cold plunge once a week and my nervous system is pretty regulated. If like I'm just going to stop there. My relationships are balanced in my life. Not that there's anything wrong with stopping there, but if
No,
you're someone who
that is a huge accomplishment if you do,
that's huge. That's
if you do
huge.
any number of those things consistently.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and those are all great conversations in and of themselves, in my opinion. But all of those topics just mentioned. But if you don't hit that plateau and go like, okay, I'm good. I'm gonna like just keep it. I'm just gonna keep kind of coasting here. If you keep going, it's a never-ending journey. And I'm not claiming that I've gone like crazy deep or anything like deeper than other people. I'm just saying like I can see enough, and I've gone far enough in my own experience to know that the closer you look at it, and this is where I'm coming back to, this is where I have the 100% certainty, is the closer you look at it, the more you start to see the connection between everything, and the concept of the infinite, of the all-encompassing love that is our creator, that is that experience, is very, very obvious, and it becomes more and more obvious. And this is why, again, this is the experience. Again, I'm not super well read on the topics, just a little bit on quantum physics, but this is where it goes. I have a good friend whose uncle is a theoretical physicist, and he goes, "Yeah, man, like the longer you look at the longer you look at anything, it just like you see the intelligent design, you see that clearly God exists. Clearly, this isn't just a random amalgamation of material that has glommed together and resulted in some chance happenings that lead into evolution, and that consciousness is a byproduct of neurochemistry, or is a product of neurochemistry. It's like it's quite the opposite. Consciousness is what produces everything. um
No, yeah, I think I've heard that like physicists describe it as describe physics as kind of, yeah, the language of the universe, and math is looped into that as well. I don't know if we have any physicists watching this, but I would love to hear their thoughts on that. Where yeah, the more they study that sort of thing, like you said, the more that it's revealed that yeah, there's an intelligent design that we haven't even scratched the surface of, right? Like how long has what goes back to Newton? I don't know if there's anyone before him, right? That really, or if there is, I'm sorry, that's just
yeah,
not on the top of my head. But the true field of studying this stuff has only gone back a couple centuries, right?
yeah,
And so there's probably so much more to discover.
yeah. And then Newtonian physics really only going as far as to explain gross matter, and quite comfortably for the way that we move through our world. But um the idea that the smaller we go, which again, if we look at from the concept of as above so below, if we expand infinitely greater, infinitely larger, then we can expand, or whatever, we can collapse inward infinitely as well, meaning that this search for the smallest physical particle, which was the pursuit of physicists for a long time, until they realized that until some of them, as far as I understand, realize that it's all consciousness. That chasing of that smallest particle doesn't get us anywhere, because that is not the nature of existence. It's not a material universe. It's a material universe produced by consciousness. So ultimately, everything comes down to energy. So, but yeah, that's so it's an interesting conversation. And the double slit experiment, which is a very famous one that if anyone hasn't read up on that or watched any videos on that, I would suggest looking that up, because that, as far as I can understand, was, as far as I remember, was an observation that particles were behaving differently when they were being observed, rather as to when they were not being observed, which was implying or inferring the fact that everything is influenced, is created by consciousness, essentially. The more you read into it, and obviously it depends who's watching it, and we can draw a lot of different conclusions, but that was kind of how I looked at it.
Yeah. Light topics, right? Just to
Light topics, yeah.
just to get the brain going, just to walk in the park. Yeah, man. No, I think that's yeah, just to get the gears turning, right? Just to be curious, just to I think it's important to ask these questions, and hopefully others feel the same. And I
Yeah.
think that is, probably a good place to wrap it up for this episode of Oneself. Adam, thank you again for, always joining me. And, I'll, before I give you any closing thoughts, I just want to say, if you like what you heard, if you're confused by what you heard, but you want to come back for more, so are we, you know what I mean? But it's not confused, but curious, right? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Curious to think, asking questions. Yeah, maybe confused too, But that's kind of our journey. Just trying to get better. We don't understand, we'll never understand everything about the nature of the world that we're living in. But yeah, we're just trying to get better,
Yeah.
as individuals, a community, some people just living on this planet. And so if you like what you heard or you inspired or you became curious of any of this stuff, like, subscribe, support any of the ways that are easy to do that for free. We really appreciate it. And yeah, Adam, any closing thoughts for episode 2 of Oneself?
No, just thanks for having me. And yeah, it was a fun conversation.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you. All right. Catch you next time.